Hello friends, my name is Marines, and this has been a big year for talking about consumerism in the booktube community. As I always say when I chime in, I think that this is probably going to be a perpetual conversation because of the very nature of what we do. And I'm not even talking about like hauls or unhauls or any one specific kind of content, but just like reading as a hobby and what that means and how in order to do this hobby, we have to be able to obtain books in some way. I think part of the problem when we do have this conversation is that tendency to paint booktube in one large broad stroke when that very thing, how we access books and our means to obtain books varies so much from person to person in the booktube community. That said, I think we also tend to focus too much on that, on the access of it, and not on the other portion of it, which is just like how we talk about consumerism, how we present it, especially as people who have channels, who have platforms, and what the community says to others, viewers, and people who would like to join, and even those of us participating, what it says to us about consumerism. And the fact that a lot of us have gone through a period of when we join booktube, we end up buying a bunch of books. Like that says something, I think, about the structure and the nature of this community. And it's something that a lot of people don't like to engage with. They just kind of want to stop with, this is a personal choice, this is my money, I can do whatever I want, and end the conversation there. Whenever you're participating in a community, I think that there are bigger conversations to have. But I've talked about this plenty on my Twitter. I've got videos up about it on my channel. I wanted to address it almost on a smaller scale as well. 2020 was a big year for me personally about coming to terms with a lot of this because I ended up spending a whole lot more time inside of my house than I originally planned. And that made me really come face to face with my collection and the way that it had grown over my time here on BookTube. And not only had it grown just like in numbers, but it had grown into something that I personally wasn't very happy with. When I started my collection, it had always been about obtaining books that I had read and loved and wanted to own a physical copy of, and then enter this year when I owned all of these books that I hadn't even read. So not only did I make my way through my collection and decide what things I wanted to keep, all of the books that you see behind me for the most part are books that I've read and loved, unless they're part of like a classics collection, but it also made me think about how I obtain books and how I want to obtain books. The best part is that I came to all of these conclusions and I was doing all of this thinking in 2020, which was the weirdest year. I did not track any of my reading in a normal way. My spending was not normal, but I still kind of want to reflect back on what actually happened in 2020 so that I can bring these lessons and this as a baseline into 2021. Plus, I thought that transparency would probably be interesting for you guys. I don't know. I went back and forth about whether or not I would make this video. Like I had the idea, I did all the prep work, but then I was like, is this weird? And then I asked Twitter and Twitter was like, it's not weird. Most people said it wasn't weird. Okay, I promise I'm going to jump into this, but a little more preamble and some baseline things. First is that I am 34 years old and the situation that I am in right now has not always been my situation, and it wasn't even my situation when I joined BookTube those years ago. So I have 15 years of work experience and have 8 years of professional experience in my field. So I have a good job and I make a pretty good salary, even though I do live alone and I live in a fairly expensive city in South Florida. That said, I've got disposable income available to me to spend on books. Mostly. 2020 was weird. I was unemployed for 4 months in 2020. I started the year off in the job that I had been at for nearly 4 years. They laid me off. It took me 4 months to find another job, which was a relatively quick bounce back, and I'm super lucky that that happened that way. It was a really stressful 4 months, and it really tightened up my spending and changed my budget in ways, again, I had no idea because 2020 caught us all by surprise. So my reading for 2020 isn't over. I'm one of those people that reads up until like December 31st, 11:59 p.m. But I suspect that I will end the year at around 100 books read. I think that's another important thing to take into consideration because as you hear about how many books that I brought in this year, it's also good to know that I read 100 books overall. Okay, so for real, how much money did I spend on books this year? We'll start with memberships. I've had an Audible subscription for a portion of this this year. I have the membership that allows you 1 credit a month, and then I was also subscribed to Audible Escape, which was their program for romance books where you could basically check out an unlimited number of books within that catalog. They discontinued that, and I also canceled this for a portion of the year, both of these things, when I lost my job, because again, I was trying to tighten up on spending. In total, I spent $198.21 on Audible credits and subscriptions, and I listened to 61 books through Audible this year. Sometimes I was mixing up listening to the audiobook with reading the physical book or something of that nature, and a lot of this just accounts for that Audible Escape subscription and how much romance that I was reading through there. Some of these romances are things that I don't even necessarily mark as read or talk about because I'm just like binging my way through them. So that, like, 61 books, that's kind of amazing. The math works out so that was essentially $3.25 per book. I also have a book of the month subscription. I didn't actually end up pausing or canceling this one because they didn't let me do it online, and this was during a time when I was having trouble functioning. These are all of the books that I obtained through Book of the Month. The Silent Patient by Alex McCullough. This was sent to me for free as part of they have a book of the year that they choose every year, and if you are part of their BFF program, which from what I gather, it's just, I don't know, being with them for a long time, they send you one of their books of the year for free. So I chose this one and I haven't read it. The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James, which I have started but have not finished. Things in Jars by Jess Kidd. These were all in January, so I got one free, one with a credit, and one as an add-on for $9.99. In February, I got Anna Kay, which I have not read yet. In March, I got The Two Lives of Lydia Bird, which I have not read yet. In April, I got Beach Read by Emily Henry, which I did read this year. In May, I got The Boyfriend Project by Farah Rashon, which I have not read yet. In June, I got One to Watch by Kate Stayman London, which I did read this year. In July, I got Big Friendship by Amina Tussaud and Anne Friedman, which I also read. In August, I got The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson, which I have read. In September, I got Cased by Isabel Wilkerson, which I have not read yet. And they also sent me a book for free for my birthday, so I got Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Jesse, which I have read. In October, I got The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by B.E. Schwab, which I have read. In November, I got This Time Next Year by Sophie Cousins, which I have not read yet. And in December, I got In a Holidays by Christina Lauren, which I have read. And I did an additional add-on for $9.99, and I got The Office of Historical Corrections by Danielle Evans, which I am in the middle of reading. So that is 16 books in total, including add-ons and the ones that they sent me for free, which totals out to $11.55 per book. Moving on to ebooks, I spent $177.45 on 18 ebooks, averaging to $9.85 per ebook. This was the one where I did the math and I was honestly glad that I was seeing it because this feels too much to me. The worst part of it is that for my books of the month, that was about half and half, I think, of books that I had read versus not read. For my ebooks, I read 5 of the 18 ebooks that I purchased. And the reason that the price per book is kind of skewed rather high is that a lot of those were either new releases that I swore I had to have that moment, or they were nonfiction books that I wanted to have a copy of, and so those tend to be a little bit more expensive. But I was getting these thinking I'm gonna read these, and I only read 5 of those 18. One of the things that I think I really want to work on in 2021 is spending $0 on ebooks. If my library doesn't have it, I don't need it, obviously. I don't need it. And finally, moving on to the physical books that I purchased in 2020. Usually what I do is when I read a book that is not in a physical format that I loved, and I want to own a physical copy of that book as part of my collection because I want to reread it, because I want to mark it up for whatever reason, I put it on a wish list so I can track it that way, and I try to slowly buy those books so that I can own them and add them to my collection. So I've got 13 of those books that I read and loved and wanted to own my own copy of. First up, we were 8 Years in Power by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Next, You Never Forget Your First, a biography of George Washington by Alexis Coe. We Are Not From Here by Jenny Torres Sanchez. The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel. Afterlife by Julia Alvarez. So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. Son of a Trickster by Eden Robinson. A Heart and a Body in the World by Deb Coletti. Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. And A Kata Witch by Nettie Okorafor. That leaves an additional additional 4 books that I bought and I hadn't read yet, and I still haven't read yet. One is Akata Warrior by Nnedi Okorafor. I just bought the second part of the series because I enjoyed the first one enough that I was like, I'm definitely gonna read the second part. And I definitely am, I just haven't yet. Next I have The Beautiful Ones, An Untamed Shore by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. Some of her books are more difficult to obtain than others, especially the earlier ones, and a lot of them are getting reprints now. I'm working on reading all of her books. I'd like to do a video about her work in general, so I got these 2 copies right at the beginning of the year before everything happened. And I was still like bright, shiny, and new and really excited about projects and stuff. So I've got these 2 books that I will also definitely read. They're from one of my favorite authors, but I just haven't yet. And Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas, which I did a whole video about why I have this book. And I was like, I'm reading it. And I actually did start it. I just haven't finished. In total, on those 17 books, I spent $257.84, which works out to just over $15 per book. All of the other books that I'm reading come primarily from the library, whether those are ebooks or audiobooks. I haven't been to a physical library all year, but I'm very lucky to belong to a system that uses Overdrive, and I can still borrow these materials through that platform. And also this year I was lucky enough to join Libro FM's Advanced Listener Copy program. So every month I can pick 1, 2, or 3 free audiobook copies, and I've read a ton of audiobooks through Libro FM this year. And then occasionally I will also get free books from the publishers. So those are all free resources that I also have at my disposal that accounts for a portion of my reading. If my math is correct, in total that is $818.37 that I spent this year. I have a feeling that I am probably forgetting something, and also maybe my math is not correct, like the math that I did while sitting on the couch and scrolling through past orders. So let's say I round this way up and say I spent $900 on books this year. That works out to be about $75 per month, which $900 is not a number that sounds happy to me, but $75 per month is more, it fits a little bit better in my head. This is in no way meant to be a flex of any sort. I also realized that while I was putting this together that I don't have a lot of information about what sort of the average is or what the norm is, I guess, if there is such a thing in BookTube. So I don't know, maybe you're hearing that I spent $900 and you're like, are you kidding? That's a ton. Or you're hearing that and you're like, I spent that in a few months. I don't know. I don't know where this lands, but $75 per month on a book habit. Looking into the new year in terms of a budget, a few things. So first is that Audible Escape is gone, and so I won't be spending that money on Audible Escape anymore. And then it really makes me kind of think about if I want to be spending this money on Audible in the first place. I read books from there, but now I have Libro FM, which was introduced to me this year. So I'm not sure, in my head, I'm like, can I do this? Swap out Libro FM completely for Audible? I just kind of want to take a look at the subscriptions on both ends and what I'm ultimately getting from the ALC program versus what I ended up listening to this year on Audible. The whole Amazon thing is just a whole other conversation. I understand that they are an evil corporation, and yet, especially for romance books and things, I can't completely quit them. So there's work to be done there. All I know is that I will definitely be spending less on Audible in 2021. I'm not buying ebooks in 2021. She says, hopefully. My one big exception is that if I need a book for a book club and an ebook, purchasing an ebook is the only way that I can get it in time, that will be my exception. I bought so many less ebooks this year, I feel than I ever have. And what this is teaching me is that my library is enough. And not only is it enough, it's better for me. If I borrow something from the library and then don't read it, that's fine. If I buy a $9 ebook and don't read it, that's $9. So I just need to quit completely with buying ebooks. It is not the format for me in terms of spending money. I'm really happy with my Book of the Month subscription. I feel like the books that I get, even though I'm like a little bit behind here and trying to be more mindful about reading the things that I get, they're curated in such a way that for the most part, I think the lowest I've ever given a Book of the Month book that I've read was 3 stars. So I'm really happy with the way that they curate and the things that they choose and what I ultimately choose from Book of the Month. I want to be a little bit more careful about some of the things that I'm choosing, because last year and in previous years I was choosing a lot of thrillers because the descriptions were the ones drawing my eyes, but I don't read that many thrillers, so I ended up with a bunch of unread thrillers. So I'm trying to be more mindful of that, but in general I'm going to keep my Book of the Month subscription, and I'm doing rather well in terms of only buying physical books that I've read and loved. So more of that. I did buy those 4 books that I didn't read and haven't read yet. So if I can get that down to 0, that's like ideal, but 4, I'm not mad about it either. That's it for me today. Let me know if this was interesting or helpful at all. If you track your spending on books and how you track it, and if you set a budget for your spending year over year. I'd love to talk to you guys about all of that down in the comments. I think this is the only sort of wrap-up video for 2020 that I will do in December. I will do the rest of my wrapping up in January, because again, I will be reading to the very last second of December 31st, so you can expect more content like this next month. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. There's this great TikTok about like looking out your window for your Amazon package, but the sound is, "You can't keep doing this to me."